we have to talk about something. If you care about my art in any way and you want to know more about me or my approach, well, I think this video will be very insightful. There is an art piece from over 100 years ago whose echoes still influence the world culture in a big way today, even if we don't acknowledge it. It's this, the black square, or Черный Квадрат. Some of you, I bet, will see this with instant skepticism. I mean, it's just a square on a canvas. A small child with a steady hand could paint this, probably. It's not even a perfect square, and I know it can be hard to take the high art world seriously when a banana duct taped to a wall sold for $6.2 million in 2019. But even if you have an open mind, I imagine most of you are still curious why I made a video about this painting. Well, let me put it this way. Regardless of what you think about the black square is going to be more relevant and more talked about than any of us, long after you and I have died. First exhibited in 1915 in St. Petersburg, or then Petrograd, just a few years before the Bolshevik Revolution, or really Russia's 5-year-long civil war, this painting is arguably the first and only of its kind in human history. There's a lot that's been written about this painting already. There are essays and videos you can search up which say it's the first truly non-objective fine art piece, but that's up for debate given that in the West there are multiple contenders for the title of first non-objective artwork. And then you just have to look at other cultures, such as the more than 1,000-year-old tradition in Islam where they paint geometric patterns that aren't supposed to represent or serve any purpose other than facilitate the worship of God, or Allah in this case. But I'm not quite proposing that the black square is special because it might be the first non-objective artwork. No. I'm making this video to explain how this painting is perhaps the perfect example of a spiritually charged non-objective artwork, which, in my interpretation, stands as a proposal for a new religion, making this painting a milestone achievement for humanity in both the artistic and spiritual realms.
You could make a religion out of this.
It is often explained and understood by art historians why this painting is a significant step for fine art. In the early 1900s, a time when all fine art up to that point could be described as pictorial representations of physical things one way or another, even if abstracted by Impressionists or Cubists, it was a very radical move to make a painting that was a representation of nothing. This is an idea that could be taken for granted by us today, but what's still not quite well understood or explained is how this painting is the outcome of a personal messianic mission, similar to how Jesus Christ's crucifixion was the outcome of his messianic mission, whatever it was. To understand what I mean, we have to look at Malevich's stated intentions, a bit of his lesser-known preceding work, and the surrounding cultural historical context. Then we can more deeply understand the significance of the black square in its uniquely spiritual power. So imagine a time without brain rot, without YouTube and instant gratification media, without televisions, without electronic music, and without electric guitars. When the pace of thoughts in the average person was slower and our focus was less influenced by the apparently random noise of other people's thoughts constantly bombarding us from screens and speakers. When words were heavier in their meaning, and when painting was the most immediately available medium for expressing serious ideas that even words struggle to capture. This was the time that Kazimir Malevich lived in, and he was deeply knowledgeable and self-aware about his own culture, with a particular appreciation for the peasantry and all its folk art and superstitions. The culture that Malevich was born into was largely historically influenced by the Eastern Orthodox Christian Church, which, ever since the Great Schism of 1054, was the dominant political, social, and religious force in eastern and some southeastern parts of Europe, especially in Russia. Bear in mind that for a lot of Europe's history, especially in the Middle Ages, art was commissioned by churches, In Eastern Europe, there really was no concept of secular art, other than maybe some folk art, until Tsar Peter the Great made an effort to culturally westernize the people of the Russian Empire in the 1720s, with one of the outcomes being the introduction of commercial and non-religious artworks into the homes of Russia's ruling class. Still, the Orthodox Church remained a big source of employment for artists all the way up to the Revolution of 1917, meaning many of Russia's early 20th century avant-garde painters had experience painting frescoes and icons for churches, or at least were familiar with the visuals of the Orthodox Church. Malevich is definitely one such artist, despite the fact that he and his Polish parents were baptized as Roman Catholic. A key difference between Orthodox and Catholic and subsequently Protestant visual traditions is where the emphasis is placed on religious icons. Unlike in Catholic and Protestant churches, where art's function is largely decorative or educational, if there's any art in the church at all, in Orthodox churches, icons are intended for prayer and to encourage prayer, giving them a more mystical and spiritual role than the images in non-Orthodox churches. It would be inaccurate to say Orthodox Christians worship icons, because icons are more like a consciousness-altering visual aid for worship, being a window to the divine through which the initiated can momentarily access the holy and transcendental world beyond everyday earthly existence, for as long as one is engaging with the icon. The icon is an image to meditate upon, at the very least. Malevich understood this very well, and he has a series of often overlooked paintings which show how well he understood this, but also reveal something interesting and unorthodox about his spirituality. Remember that Malevich was not a traditionally religious man and did not attend church, but like he and many of his contemporaries, and myself, they were greatly inspired by the elevated role that images play in orthodoxy. In these paintings, which we can call the Yellow series from roughly 1907 and 1908, Malevich paints subjects that at first glance are engaging in a religious ritual, with halos around their heads, soaked in the golden and warm light of some heavenly reality. But these are not depictions of biblical events, nor do they really have anything to do with the Christian canon. What Malevich is instead doing is isolating the phenomenon of spiritual meditation through icons from the theological and biblical story, capturing only the essence of spirituality and mysticism, and nothing else. The posthumously named Triumph Over the Heavens especially looks like a template for Orthodox icons that depict the transfiguration or the ascension of Christ, except that it has no reference to Jesus Christ, the apostles, or anyone in the church. This is an image of a sort of agnostic religion, absent any names, perhaps expressing Malevich's hope and desire for some otherworldly reality which is still so far inaccessible by us. Maybe Malevich, being an outsider to the church, was not convinced that Christian dogma was the only way to realize oneself spiritually. At the same time, he recognized and took inspiration from the benefits of Orthodox Christianity, namely the community, multisensory rituals, and the constant focus on a higher calling that leads one to a more purposeful and meditative, motivated life. I'm emphasizing this because, unlike the Bolshevik revolutionaries who would take power in Russia a decade later, Malevich and pre-Soviet avant-garde painters did not hold religions in disdain. Now let's fast forward to the magnum opus, skipping over what many art scholars have already talked about when discussing Malevich's progression towards the black square, and let's consider how this piece was first presented to the world. This was the only photo from the opening exhibition in Petrograd, which was titled 010. It was also the debut of a new approach to art called suprematism. More on that later. But let's now consider this: an icon corner. This is a feature in many homes of Russian Orthodox Christians. Placed in the corner of the room where they are most visible to anyone who enters, The icons are highly visible reminders to the faithful, and per custom would have been venerated before greeting members of the home. Now consider this again. Clearly, the placement of the black square and the surrounding pieces is no coincidence. Without even considering the painting, what does the placement of it say? Bear in mind that the viewers in Petrograd would know the religious context without needing an explanation. So, is it that the painting should be venerated? Is it meant to be a religious object? And now consider just the painting. What does it say? What did Malevich want to say? If these are difficult questions, don't worry, the painting in the exhibition was difficult for many of the visitors too. I do hope that with what I've presented so far, you can start to see how there's something revelatory about this painting and how it was exhibited. A student of Malevich once remarked that when the black square first appeared under Malevich's brush, he, quote, thought it so important an event in his creation that for a whole week he was unable to eat, drink, or sleep. When was the last time you felt such a motivating emotion making art? I have transformed myself in the zero of form and dragged myself out of the rubbish-filled pool of academic art. It appears to me the painting of Raphael, Rubens, Rembrandt, etc. has become nothing more than a conglomeration of countless things. Until now, the artist has always pursued the thing. Why is Malevich so fixated on things? What could be wrong with painting the things we see in the world? Well, to summarize the manifestos which I have just quoted, the true value of art is the feeling which gave rise to it. The more clearly that feeling is expressed and not obfuscated by representations of objects, the more pure the artwork becomes. Painters should abandon subject and objects if they wish to be pure painters. Suprematism is the rediscovery of pure art which, in the course of time, had become obscured by the accumulation of things, and the square is the first step of pure creation in art. Before it, there are naive deformities and copies of nature. It is the face of the new art. Malevich realized that in the creation of the square and in exhibiting it as a fine art piece, he effectively launched a new era in art, that is, modern art. I struggle to underscore the magnitude of what he did, the significance of this monolith, the zero of form, how groundbreaking this was for the time. And so I have to, yet again, bring in a Jesus comparison, bearing in mind that I myself am not a religious follower nor a believer in church dogma. If Jesus saw the utter hypocrisy of the Pharisees and their legalistic rituals, so did Malevich when criticizing academic art and its realism. Academic realists, they are the last descendants of the savage. I love that quote. No torture chamber of the academies can withstand the passage of time. Forms move and are born, and we make newer and newer discoveries, and what I reveal to you do not conceal, and it is absurd to force our age into the old forms of time past. In copying or tracing the forms of nature, we have fed our consciousness with a false understanding of art. If there is a chronological split in the timeline of humanity, such that the Old Covenant is of less spiritual stature than Christ's New Covenant, then, in 1915, art, thanks to suprematism, has come into its own, that is, attained its pure, unapplied form, and has recognized the infallibility of non-objective feeling. It is attempting to set up a genuine world order, a new philosophy of life. It recognizes the non-objectivity of the world and is no longer concerned with providing illustrations of the history of manners, that is, the depictions of people, their things, and pretty landscapes. If Jesus showed people the way to a kingdom that is not of this world, then I have destroyed the ring of the horizon and escaped from the circle of things, from the horizon ring which confines the artist in the forms of nature. If what Jesus said, being simple yet profound, was considered dangerous by the powers that be and the status quo, then the square seemed incomprehensible and dangerous to the critics and the public. And this, of course, was to be expected. If Jesus had disciples, then Malevich had his students. If the early followers of Jesus were persecuted by Roman and Jewish authorities, then the Russian avant-garde was persecuted as well. And here we take a darker turn. Stalin. And this is my grandfather. Don't worry, he was only a geologist. I'm just showing you this to emphasize how the system, the totalitarian implementation of communism, permeated everything in Soviet life. And if something was not in service to the state's conception of communism and its aims, whatever they were, then that thing was eliminated. And of course, art was susceptible to this. It is with a great but also predictable irony that the supposedly progressive and revolutionary project of communism or socialism turned into an asphyxiating, fascicized one, whereby the second half of the 1920s, the avant-garde movements of the decade prior, suprematism included, were labeled as bourgeois and useless formalism, which did not at all satisfy the taste of the proletarian working class that had come to replace the more spiritually inclined rural peasantry. The Russian art world then took a huge step backwards, at least from the suprematist perspective, thanks to the state's enforcement of a more favorable style, socialist realism. If artists didn't depict idealized scenes of working-class life, they were, in short, repressed. Under Stalin, the cultural climate became much more conservative, thanks to the underlying fear and paranoia that propelled a system of what was really totalitarianism in progressive clothing. Malevich was under no illusion, and as early as 1919 wrote in his diary that there has never been such a slavery as that spawned by communism. And so he, being the forward-thinking person he was, soon wound down his suprematist approach and regressed back into depictions of things, though carrying with him the lessons he learned from his prophecy. Still, empires rise and fall, wars are fought, won, and lost. New technologies develop and old ones become obsolete. Political winds change, people live and die, and all the while since, the monolith, the black square, the very idea of it, stands, not as a symbol of darkness or of nihilism, that would be a fundamental misinterpretation in my view, but as a beacon from another world, the non-objective world, where upon the contemplation of its meaning, you are sucked into another space, another consciousness, and you forget for the moment all your earthly woes, problems, and desires, and are left with nothing but a feeling, a pure feeling, the essence of human experience, after all. I believe we will never find an answer to the question, why? Why are we here? All religions, I think, are doomed attempts at answering this question. Even Jesus predicted the churches after him would be flawed. But I don't see this as a negative thing necessarily. It's beautiful enough that we can meditate on the question of why, which I believe is the very feeling that the black square represents. Not an object, not a thing, but a feeling. The innate human yearning for something outside of ourselves. It's this thought which led me to put a mock-up gallery featuring the square in the visuals for Monochrome, a song by the band Lovejoy who I toured with this past fall. This particular song is nothing less than the expression of a spiritual crisis. The square is indifferent to all of our ephemeral states, and ever since this form entered the collective consciousness, even if you were to destroy all copies and images of it, the idea of the black square would still remain, because it never was about things anyways.